So I just want to talk a little bit about this book I picked up during a recent trip to Norfolk. I went to a place near Norwich and picked this up in a charity shop. It's called It's Fun to Entertain. It's a cookbook by Gwen Marchant from 1965. So yeah, this is a fascinating book, and I picked it up primarily because I thought we were going to be treated maybe to some of those weird 1960s style party recipes, like this weird thing where we've got cocktail sausages jammed into a big lettuce or cabbage or something there. But also I thought maybe there might be some of those freaky, terrifying Jell-O type of confections in here, which seemed to be quite popular in the 60s and 70s. So it turned out to be quite different to what I expected, but that was actually quite an interesting and good thing. Let's take a look inside. So actually, just the first thing to say about this is one of the things I love about buying second-hand things, these little surprises that you get that I kind of call bycatch. This book contains some bycatch. Anyway, let's have a look at that in a moment. So I paid £1.99 for this. It was originally a library book from Norfolk County Library, but it's been withdrawn. The library card has been taken out of there. The original retail price was 10 shillings and sixpence. Back in 1965 when this was first published. But anyway, let's have a look at the bycatch that we got in here, which was somebody else's recipe cards. So this is little recipe snips that somebody has cut out and put in this cookbook when they've had it at home. So we've got some Zena Skinner International Cookery cards. I presume this was a set that you collected with something. Yeah, these were probably given away in a magazine, Women's Realm. But there's some little international cookery cards, and some of them are quite good. So there's kedgeree there. There's a recipe for kedgeree on there. Some of them are a little bit lame, like frankfurters and sauerkraut is basically, get some frankfurters and open a can of sauerkraut. Not exactly a recipe, but interesting nonetheless, these vintage recipe cards. And then that's been snipped out of a flour packet, so that's a fruitcake mix. We might have a go at that sometime in another video. And we've got a liver hot pot recipe there, which has been snipped out of probably a Knorr soup packet and saved as well. So yeah, we might have a go at some of these recipes. I think probably the fruitcake sounds interesting. That's been cut out of a McDougall's flour packet. Anyway, that is not the main joy of this book. Let's actually talk a little bit about what this book was trying to do. So this book's called It's Fun to Entertain. The author's face is on there. There we go. That's Gwen Marchant. Are you not entertained? Right, let's talk about why this book exists. So why did people need a book to tell them how to have fun eating food? Well, for that, we've got to look at when this was published and what was happening in the world when this was published. So this was published in 1965 in the UK. And so let's just have a little look at the timeline of what's going on in the UK in 1965, or rather the years leading up to then. So it's important to note that this book is intended for new householders. It's intended for actually housewives. It's got some gender stereotypes in there, which we will talk about in a minute. But this is intended for new householders setting up their own home and trying to find their feet in the world of entertaining guests. Now, why would anybody need a book to do that? Why wouldn't they have just learnt that already? This book was published in 1965. Now, in the UK, there were several major events that really shaped the first half of the century in many ways, but certainly in culinary terms. Firstly, we've got World Wars I and II. On top of that, we've got rationing during and in fact after World War II. The rationing after World War II lasted longer than the war did. And then in the middle of those two things, there was the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression would mostly hit America, but it was a global phenomenon. And in fact, in the UK, although the level of suffering and poverty was not as severe as it was in the United States, it was an economic depression that really lasted for the duration between the two wars. And so we've got this whole period of scarcity. Starts really in 1914 and carries on until the mid-1950s. So then if we look at an average lifespan in the 20th century, so the average age at which people got married and set up a new home in the 20th century was from the ages of 20 to 28, so in their 20s basically. In 1965, people turning 20 or so would have been born right at the end of World War II. They would have lived their childhood through rationing, and they would have actually only just come out in their sort of adolescent and adult years out of rationing and started to see scarcity subsiding. So if we look at their parents grew up in scarcity between the two wars. As those parents came of age, World War II was raging, and when those parents set up their own homes in their 20s, rationing was in full swing. So the parents of the target market of this book may never have known an environment where food was eaten socially. So basically, there was a whole generation of children of those people who had to learn it all again. So in case you're wondering, I'm not either of these generations, so everything I've told you here about rationing and scarcity I didn't witness firsthand. I am, however, one of the children of the target audience of this book. I was born a couple of years after this was published, and so what I witnessed as I was growing up was in fact the evolution of modern British cookery. So I watched us climbing out of this hole of frugality and developing into the modern and vibrant and actually sometimes quite adventurous cuisine that is characteristic of Britain today. So here we are with a book that's essentially just trying to tell people how to start having fun socially with food. So as I say, I thought the recipes in here might be those really freaky 1960s recipes that look terrifying to our modern eyes, but actually nothing of the sort. The recipes in this book are in fact quite basic, solid recipes. They are recipes for cakes and sandwiches and scones if you like, soups and casseroles. They are elegantly simple, most of these recipes, and they look fine. There are one or two weird things in here, and there are one or two things in here that would be made with rather basic ingredients. So some of these ingredients, for example, instead of a tomato sauce, they will use a tomato soup base, either a powdered soup or a tin of tomato soup or something like that. So some of these are a little bit basic and frugal still, but by and large, the recipes in here aren't strange at all. They're just actually really solid, sensible recipes, but they are the kind of things that you can cook and share. And that's really the intent of this book. Actually, when we read the preface, this is not about impressing people with your culinary skills. This is about actually learning some solid skills and being reliable in the kitchen and being a reliable entertainer and not letting people down when you invite them around for a party, which is actually quite a cool idea. Now, we're going to have a look at one of the recipes in here and we're going to try it out. But before we do, we probably ought to also address there are some gender stereotypes that are quite striking now. Now, back in 1965, things were different. So I'm not going to make excuses for this. And when I read this out, you need to understand, I'm not saying that this was right, but this is how it was. And so we've got phrases like this here. It says, so this is the preface to the book by Gwen Marchant, and it says, entertaining today has lost much of its previous formality, but none of its importance. Young or old, every woman longs to see herself as a successful hostess. So I know that some people are going to wrinkle their noses at this. Young or old, every woman longs to see herself as a successful hostess. That is a statement of how things used to be. Now, you could either really get upset about that and decide that this book is unacceptable and maybe we should burn it, or you could actually take that as an encouraging sign for how far we've come. So things used to be one way, things are a different way now. So I tend to take encouragement from this, that change is possible. So yes, this is the recipe that caught my eye, which is cheese and anchovy French toasts. Now, I've made French toast before. We used to call it fisherman's toast or eggy bread here in the UK. However, I am also aware that it's called French toast in other parts of the world. So anyway, we're going to have a go at this recipe today. So in summary, this recipe, what we have to do, we have to mash up anchovies with butter and spread that on the bread. We have to make some scrambled egg with cheese and fill the sandwiches. And then we have to dunk them in egg and fry them in lots of butter. So anyway, let's head over to the kitchen now and have a go at making this. The recipe's all in ounces in the book, so I'm going to be working in ounces. I've got a set of digital kitchen scales that can be set to grams or ounces. So I'm working in ounces. So what we've got to do first is combine 4 anchovy fillets with an ounce of butter. No, an ounce and a half of butter. There is a lot of butter in this recipe, by the way. We've got to take 4 of these anchovy fillets and mash them up with that butter. Okay, set aside the anchovies because we're going to need those for a garnish later. Just using a fork to try to break up the anchovy fillets into the butter. Bit tough going at first. I imagine this will get easier as the butter softens. Okay, that's looking pretty well mixed, as much as I can really expect it to be. So now we need 8 slices of white bread. The trimmings won't go to waste. I will make a bread and butter pudding or something like that with them. So let's cut. Crusts off. So we're going to butter these slices of bread with the anchovy butter. So I think the way to do this is to divide that roughly into 4, because then we're using 1/4 of it for each pair of slices. Okay, so that's the bread prepared. Next we have to make a scrambled egg mixture to go in the middle of these sandwiches. So that takes 2 eggs, pinch of cayenne pepper, a tablespoon of milk, and 2 ounces of grated cheese. Okay, so here we're making a scrambled egg mixture. I've got an ounce of butter in the pan. That's what the recipe calls for. Just about a tablespoon of milk, a pinch of cayenne pepper, and then the 2 ounces of grated cheese. And if you're wondering why my spoon is wonky, I carved this myself out of a log of oak. I'll put a link in the video description if you want to see me carve this. Okay, it's definitely starting to thicken now. I'm trying to use traditional tools and methods here, so I'm using a wooden spoon. Probably a silicone spatula would be a better tool here, but I'm trying to keep this a little bit authentic to the way it was done in the book, or probably would have been done. Okay, we can see it starting to scramble now. Okay, I'm going to take that off the heat now, because that will continue to cook and firm up a bit more in the next few minutes. Okay, so we've got our scrambled egg mixture, and again, what I'm going to do is just notionally divide that into quarters in the pan, so that we've got an idea of how much we're going to put in each sandwich. So the next stage calls for the other 2 eggs, which we have to beat together with about 1/2 cup of milk. So in the pan, we want 1.5 ounces of butter. That is about that much. Now, wow, this recipe has consumed, and we will consume, 1/2 packet of butter here. All I can say is this better be good. Because if I'm going to push that many calories in my face, I want them to be tasty and worthwhile calories. Okay. Well, to my slight surprise, we've managed to keep them together. Just so we don't waste this last bit of egg mixture, I'm just going to spoon it on top of the sandwiches that had maybe a bit less soaked into them. This is not a non-stick pan, but there is so much butter in here that sticking is not a problem. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Okay, now the book says to garnish each one with a twisted fillet of anchovy, so that's what we will do. A little bit of cress. Okay, well, what do you think? Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Let's get this to the table and give it a taste. Okay, so here we go. Cheesy anchovy French toast, courtesy of It's Fun to Entertain. Let's give that a taste. It looks pretty good. Interesting. Anchovies are not overpowering in this recipe. And actually what this dish reminds me of is some of the tapas offerings I've had in southern Spain, because that combination of fish and lots of butter and cooked egg. Has a distinctly Spanish sort of vibe to it, I would say. I have no complaints here. The anchovies, I mean, if you don't like anchovies, if you don't like fish, you're not going to like this. Because the anchovies are not just a seasoning here, they are a flavour. However, it's a lovely combination, and wow, it's ever so rich and buttery. Very satisfying dish. Yep, now I would probably serve that with a bit of salad maybe, possibly some fried potatoes or something like that on the side. But that's a really tasty, wholesome and filling dish. Really satisfying. Tons of butter in there, you know, but what a treat. Let's head back to the studio now and just have a little wrap up about this book, and we'll just reflect on what we've learned from this book. So there we go, that was cheese and anchovy French toast, and that was quite delicious. And yeah, I'm going to make that again because that was a really nice, hearty, tasty and interesting dish. I will probably have a go at some of the other recipes in here as well. So there we go, that was It's Fun to Entertain by Gwen Marchant. What an interesting book. And it's been a lot of fun discovering this and actually thinking about what this book meant in its context. It's also given me a bit of an appreciation for the plenty and the choices that we have now. And we have actually a vibrant food culture here now because we've recovered from that difficult post-war period that went on actually for decades. This is where food stopped being boring and pedestrian in the UK. People started to get a little bit of confidence in the kitchen, and you know, whilst these are basic recipes, they are actually good ones. And so this is where British cooking started to not be horrible. So I hope that's been interesting. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.